So anyway, now that we've finished the gardening segment, welcome to Therapy Unlocked, where we talk all things therapy. My name is Emily Huffman, and this is Katrina Mondragon. And today we're going to be discussing how to quit being a chicken and take yourself to therapy, how to convince your parents that they need therapy too, and the fact that your ex is probably not a narcissist, even though pop psychology says that he is. So with that said, good morning. How you doing?
Good morning, good afternoon, happy time zone, whenever you're listening.
All right. So do you want to give the humans their disclaimer?
Sure, there is a little disclaimer. I am a professional. I'm not your professional. Nothing we're about to talk about should be taken as medical, legal, or otherwise advice. This podcast is for education and amusement. That is it. That's the disclaimer.
All right, education, amusement, and because I'd like to be famous. So please like, follow, subscribe, creep us, stalk us, find out what color my grandma's hair was.
It
It's probably
wasn't.
gray, but that's it. Moving on. Let's see, don't be a chicken. Take yourself to therapy. Go to therapy. It is 2025. It is the year that everybody is going to gather their courage and stick it in their gullet and make the phone call, is what I think. But it is extremely intimidating. And I have certainly been at different points in my life reticent to start therapy, even when I have been in therapy before, because I'm intimidated by the process. And I thought that it might be useful to give a double-sided perspective on that, both from the clinician and from an incoming client, maybe somebody who has never tried therapy before, or they had a bad experience in the past. What would you try to do, or what would you suggest to someone looking for the next step to quitting being a chicken, to gathering their courage?
Definitely ceasing with the name calling for sure. I don't think I'm a chicken if I'm not able to do something, unless I'm doing something that's like the chicken dance. And then, of course, I'm trying to be a chicken. But I don't think it's somebody's lacking to be reticent about starting something incredibly difficult and painful and risky. People don't talk about the risks of therapy. It is a risky process to engage in something that could change the course of your life.
Right? No, that's a
And
really insightful.
you mentioned courage. I'll quote a lady that I really respect and like. Brene Brown says, courage is having fear and showing up anyway. And
Love
so
Brene Brown.
that would be to get over that hump, would be call your insurance, get the list of providers, make the difficult phone calls that may or may not get answered or responded to. And I know that rejection sucks. And sometimes clinicians have lives of their own and they don't respond to phone calls, A, in a timely manner, or B, at all. I really hate when I hear about clinicians not responding to phone calls at all. That's sad, but I kind of get it because some clinicians are carrying caseloads beyond what I think is human capacity. And so they're stretched so thin, they can't answer the phone in a timely manner.
Right, that makes sense. For new patients, for incoming patients, what would you say that the when you have someone come in, is your first impression of them, hey, you're 36 years old, why have you not been in therapy yet? Are you feeling judgmental towards that? Is that a gut instinct for you if you encounter somebody who maybe is taking that first move at 30, 40, 50, 60 years old to come to therapy for the first time? I think a lot of people might be reticent because they think, well, it's too late for me. I should have fixed these problems in my teens, in my 20s, and now here I am, a fully grown adult, and I need to just deal with it.
I think I heard you should on oneself, and that's something we discussed last time. We
Mhm.
don't should on ourselves or others. And
That's
so
right.
I don't know what I was going to say beyond that, but I do say that a lot as far as not shitting on oneself, because when we do it to other people, we get those feelings of like resentment and anger, like you should XYZ. And when we do it to ourselves, we can fall short, like I shoulda, coulda, woulda, oughta. but I didn't.
Very, very true. Honestly, we should put that on a t-shirt. Don't should on anyone. Don't should on anyone. I love it. So in that same vein, how do you break the ice with a new client?
Breaking the ice. Do you mean like establishing rapport?
I mean, let's say you have that person that is 2025, new year, new me. I'm making a resolution. I'm going to therapy. I'm going to find out what all those ex-boyfriends were talking about. And I'm a little bit nervous. And so I'm coming in for my first intake. I don't know what that process is.
To ease people's mind, I talk first. And I
Mm,
do sometimes talk a bit fast, so I try to reel that in. But the first, I would say 10 to 15 minutes of an intake is the informed consent, which is going over the paperwork that was already signed in a verbal manner. And so when I give my spiel about confidentiality, about we can't be friends on Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, none of that, and like my court policies, when I'm running through all of that, they're allowed to give they I think are given the opportunity to breathe and like, okay, I don't have to be the one talking right now. She's talking.
give them that beat, give them that moment, then ask them if they just want to listen to music for the rest of the hour. That's what we covered that one last time too. Um, that's a great strategy, I think. Personally, I'm nervous every time. Sometimes I'm nervous to return to a clinician that I have seen for the previous 6 months for a new treatment plan, and I don't know what they're going to say. So, with that said, in the vein of speaking all things therapy, are you a clinician that doesn't diagnose, or are you a clinician that does diagnose?
All clinicians have the capacity and capability to diagnose. They give us that training in school with the big diagnostic and statistical manual of mental disorders. And back when I
Mhm.
was in school, I learned from the DSM-4. So there's actually some stuff that's outdated in what I learned. And there's some new stuff in the new one, like prolonged grief disorder. We can talk more about that another time, that didn't even
Mm.
exist when I was in school. I graduated in 2013. There was no prolonged grief disorder. There was no insurance company covering for if you're sad and missing a loved one. What
Wow.
was the question?
Um, the question, you know what? You said what is the question? I started thinking about prolonged grief disorder and whether or not we should talk about that and when we should talk about that and what we would have to say about that. So that's ADHD on ADHD for y'all. Uh,
I don't have ADHD. I've been tested.
True. I have enough for both of us. I've also been tested. But no, I think the question was, let's see, DSM-5. Oh, do you diagnose? Do you diagnose or do you
Oh,
not diagnose? I think that some people
short
are
answer,
maybe
yes.
reticent to find out what is wrong with them. And I say that with big, juicy air quotes because wrong is very relative depending on situations. But do you diagnose? Do you find yourself informing patients of a
Short answer is yes, I
encompassing
do
label?
diagnose. It can be helpful in guiding in the course of treatment. No, I don't see people as the labels that they happen to have on their chart. They are not puzzles to be solved of PTSD and ADHD and NPD and BPD and whatever other acronyms. There's a big book, but I don't see them as a puzzle to be solved or something broken to be fixed. I come at much more from a humanistic perspective, as I see individuals as humans and people. And let's figure out what works for you, and we'll do more of that.
That makes so much sense. And when you have, a diagnosis and you have a label that, something that's pre-existing coming into a therapy session, that could also cause a little reticence. That could also cause a little, hey, I previously went to therapy. They told me I had any of those acronyms, any of that alphabet soup, a cluster B. And I felt like there was nothing I could do to fix what was different about my personality. I just fit within that category. But then now to return to therapy, it can be difficult to think that you could be facing judgment because of that diagnosis that's sitting in front of you. Do you have any words of wisdom to those who are wanting to return to therapy?
If you go to a therapist that judges you for a diagnosis, run. Find another therapist. Because a therapist shouldn't judge you before they ever freaking meet you. And they
Mm-hmm.
shouldn't be judging you. And I am going to shit on some therapists now. They shouldn't be assuming anything about you, period. But there's a lot of people, and it's sad to say, they'll call up a therapist and say, "Hi, I've been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder." And the therapist says, "I'm so sorry, that's outside of my scope of practice," and then turn them away. And that's where I get a lot of the clients that I work with. They've been to therapist after therapist who have said, "I'm sorry, I can't help you." And
So, what would you say to the devil's advocate of that scenario, which is that if someone recognizes an internal bias, should they withdraw that from their scope of practice?
if someone recognizes an internal bias within themselves as a clinician, yes, it would be appropriate to refer out. And that's kind of the other side of it. If a clinician is getting flustered within themselves, if they're finding themselves working harder than the client, if they're getting overwhelmed, that's a sign that they're doing maybe too much and maybe they need to pull back. Maybe they need to set boundaries. Maybe they need to do their own self care. And so, in that sense, a clinician's got to protect their own peace. But that doesn't mean that people aren't trying their absolute hardest. There is a stigma in the mental health community against people with borderline personality disorder, and everybody's ex is a narcissist.
Everybody's ex is a narcissist. And I think that we can chalk that one to pop psychology. But we're going to get to that in a moment. I do want to touch on the second segment of today's podcast. And that is we've gone over how to self-talk ourselves. Let's ditch the negative self-talk, ditch the name calling, make the calls, call your insurance provider, ask for your list. If you don't have insurance, generally there are free local resources that you can contact to get connected with therapy services at little to no cost. And that's just the first step. You have to make the calls. If you make the calls and then you sit on the information, so be it. And don't should on anyone. Don't should on yourself. Don't should on anyone else. So don't think to yourself, I should have taken care of this sooner. I should have addressed this another time. But that said, I hope that everybody reaches their personal therapy goals in 2025. And I also hope that their parents go to therapy. And I think that might be the nicest compliment you could give anyone. I hope your parents have gone to therapy. I hope they're going to therapy. Uh, and if you would share with us any successful tips for taking our parents to therapy, getting them to make the call and address those long held issues.
Boundaries.
Boundaries. Yeah, I love boundaries. Boundaries are my favorite. Boundaries are the
Big
distance at
ones,
which
small
you can
ones.
love themselves and another, or love oneself and another. Yeah.
I won't say who, but I will say that I've convinced a family member to go to therapy by being a boring, repetitive gray rock. I'm sorry,
Interesting.
I'm not your therapist. I can't be confidential. And I think that's a therapy thing. And you can say that again and again. I think that's something for a professional might be able to
Well,
help with.
and for those of you who are not professionals joining us today, I too have had this experience. And my go to line was, I'm your child, not your therapist. So if you're not a professional, you're still not their therapist, and you don't have to be. Um, but I like the gray rocking. I think gray rocking especially works well with narcissistic parents because there is that probably a lifetime of future tripping, and perhaps you'll get to it at some point, and all of those other things, and circling back around. And at that point, at the point that you're an adult and you're aware, and maybe you've gone to therapy and you can recognize that your parent has that need too, you're not going to break through what has worked for them for 10, 20, 30 years prior to this point in time when you're healing, but they're still unhealed.
I don't
What'd
know
you
if
say?
I said they may still be stuck.
Right. Stuck. That's the word, stuck. Yeah. When someone is stuck and they're not willing to move forward anymore, they're just not going to hear new stimulus. They're not going to hear new information, in my opinion. They'll pull from that same playbook and just
that's
whip
where
out the next tactic.
that's where the repetition comes in. If you just repeat yourself, maybe therapy would help. Maybe therapy would help. Maybe therapy would help. Don't get mad. Just repeat yourself and be mindful.
Yeah. No, that's wonderful. I too have convinced a family member to attend therapy. And it was very much a boundary making situation where it was almost an ultimatum to where I'm not sure that this contact can continue unless you attend therapy. Is that something that you would recommend? I mean, for the record, it was effective, but would you recommend it?
I don't recommend anything to anybody, but as far as effectiveness, was it?
It was.
Then
It
why
worked.
not?
Facts. Facts.
I don't know that I'm
Yeah.
a fan of ultimatums, just as a general concept. But that doesn't mean that they're not ever necessary.
True. That would be an interesting podcast as well. And maybe our viewers could chime in. In what situation is an ultimatum necessary? If you have been listening and you comment, I will like you. I don't have any money and I can't give you anything.
Except adoration.
Adoration and pride. Pride is your prize. If you comment the secret phrase, pride will be your prize. That said, moving on.